Today on Ag News Daily.
In times like this, people, maybe they pull back. I think one of the things that on their evaluation list of what should I do different based on what I did in 25, I think to maintain your agility in terms of your flexibility on farm. And we have a new product launch this year, Certain herbicide. So it's pre-post flexibility.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Michelle Stangler and I are recording remotely today as Tanner was at Husker Harvest Days this week, Michelle. And from what I've heard, it was nice weather, but maybe lower than normal turnout, both from a vendor perspective and from an attendee perspective.
Interesting. And it's fun to see that the last few outdoor farm shows are happening, at least here in the Midwest. But there's a lot of events still coming up, and you're hosting one yourself, too.
I am. Thanks for giving me a segue there to mention it. I am hosting an event, not that we're trying to exclude anyone, but really geared toward rural female business owners next month. So, yes, I'm excited. It'll be the first time I've put on my own event. And it was just fueled by a passion to help others in the business and entrepreneurial space.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So I know that any Iowan or nearby, I think it'll be a great experience for them.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat a little bit about it. And I'm sure we'll bring some content, hopefully, from that event, as there'll be a lot of rural Main Street folks there. But let's turn our attention this week to the weather, as last weekend's frost stretched across the Red River Valley, Michigan and Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin, as well as the Northeast, damaging crops that had some strong yield potential. The frost risk looks minimal now through mid-September as warmer weather takes over. I think it's supposed to be 90 degrees here in central Iowa. But for corn and soybeans in the south and east, dry weather has already taken a toll. At this point, rainfall is unlikely to improve yields. And those warmer stretches come with a central ridge, bringing highs in the 80s and 90s and even 100s in parts of the plains and the mid-south. The west, however, will cool off between 5 to 15 degrees below average after record-setting heat to end August, and in the northern plains, above average warmth continues, with some scattered showers helpful for late maturing crops, but heavier rains could slow the remaining spring wheat harvest. Meanwhile, drought is expanding in some parts of the mid-south that haven't seen rain in 40-plus days. The Mississippi River at Memphis is nearly 4 feet below low stage, and of course, this is concerning as we head into harvest season here, which we're going to see a pretty big crop, but reports are showing soybeans yielding 15 to 25 bushels below expectation, and that could, of course, there be impacting shipping costs as well. Showers could bring relief in the western and central plains this week, but for farmers trying to harvest, that could also mean some delays. As we look at the 2-week weather outlook, we're going to see some rainfall chances slim across much of the central and eastern U.S., where drought has been spreading fast. And I know we're starting to see combines roll here in central Iowa. Michelle, what about up there near you in Wisconsin?
Well, of course, corn silage is in the midst of it. It's not quite that corn for grain, but it's definitely coming around the corner. I can't believe it's almost the middle of September. And talking about the USDA's latest condition report, showed some progress and some harvests, but average to the 5-year average. Corn is rated 68% good to excellent, down 1% from last week. Progress is near average, though, with 95% in the dough stage, 74% dented, and 25% mature. 4% of the corn crop is now harvested. Soybeans are good. Soybeans good to excellent conditions dipped to 68%, a drop of 1% compared to the week previously. 97% of the crop is setting pods, 21% dropping leaves. Spring wheat is 85% harvested in line with the seasonal average. I know I've been hearing about some disease, so we'll see really what does that come the full harvest expectations.
Well, earlier this week, the Department of Health and Human Services released their Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy, part of the Make America Healthy Again Commission. This is the second major report from the MAHA Commission, and the plan outlines more than 120 initiatives aimed at tackling childhood chronic diseases through better nutrition, more physical activity, and addressing some environmental health factors. Health Secretary RFK Jr. called it a roadmap to resolve America's escalating health crisis. One new area of focus includes collaborating with agriculture on precision techniques to help farmers reduce their reliance on crop protection products. Farm leaders say the updated strategy reflects progress compared to the Commission's first report earlier this year. AFBF President Zippy Duvall stated that the final MAHA strategy is now out, and it reflects a greater understanding of how our food is grown, as well as the opportunities to make smart, science-based improvements. That's progress, and we appreciate the open dialogue during the past few months as farmers explained the real-world challenges and opportunities they face. The strategy includes expanded research into nutrition, rural and tribal health, and precision agriculture, while also promoting American-grown fruits, vegetables, and meat, along with reintroducing, whole milk in schools K through 12, which is a huge win there for the dairy industry, Michelle. USDA Secretary Rollins says farmers and ranchers are part of the solution, adding the agency will continue to support regenerative practices and conservation programs. And from the soybean industry, ASA President Caleb Ragland welcomed recognition of EPA's approval process as the global standard, but warned against misinformation on soybean oil, urging caution on rules that could harm farmers. And I know the other big takeaway from this report was ultra-processed foods. That's been a huge one of debate. Something like 70%, I believe it said, of children's calories were coming from ultra-processed foods, and 50% of American adults' calories were coming from ultra-processed foods, compared to when we look at our European counterparts, they're only looking at about 10 to 15, 30% of their calories. So the other big takeaway I think I read in that report was we're going to see a definition of what ultra-processed foods really means. I was at an event earlier this week in Syracuse, New York, actually speaking to a group of dairy folks. And somebody asked me a great question afterward, Michelle. They said, how do we cut through the noise? Because when we think about dairy and meat, we use the word processed, and technically those foods are processed. Consumers have this misconception now that I think if foods are processed, that means something's been added in or it's unhealthy for you. So hopefully this definition of what ultra-processed foods is will help provide some clarity to American agriculture as well.
It's certainly a conversation, and that word of processing, the connotations that go along with it. Grew up on a dairy farm, so I'm well familiar with drinking from the bull tank, and now I drink processed milk, but I know, there's a lot of other things to it, and the safety there is for my own good. So definitely a lot of interesting perspectives. So thanks for bringing that up. But as we look at trade, the U.S. agriculture trade deficit widened further here in July, according to data released from the USDA on Monday this week, highlighting the challenge facing President Donald Trump as he vows to reverse the trend. USDA data shows exports fell short of imports by nearly $5 billion last month, a gap that's 9% wider than a year ago and the largest ever recorded for July. So far this year, though, the farm trade deficit has ballooned to a record $33.6 billion in just the first 7 months. Much of that is being driven by, of course, rising imports, even as President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on other countries in an effort to cut the overall trade gap. The widening farm trade gap this year has been mostly driven by a jump in imports, just as Trump slapped tariffs on other countries in a push to shrink the overall deficit. That further cements a shift that has been building since the president's first term, with the sector that has long run major trade surpluses being a consistent net importer. And there is some good news here on the trade front.
There is. India is one of those, I think, coveted partners for the U.S. because of their growing and robust middle class. On the trade front, President Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have pledged to resume trade talks, signaling a potential thaw after weeks of tension over tariffs and Russian oil purchases. Meanwhile, President Trump signed an order this week implementing a new trade agreement with Japan, expected to boost U.S. agricultural sales by about $8 billion a year. Japan is expected to have a 75% increase in U.S. rice procurements and expanded purchases of corn, soybeans, fertilizer, bioethanol, including for sustainable aviation fuel and other American farm products. Over the past 5 years, Japan has averaged just under $13 billion annually in U.S. farm goods. The White House highlighted that Japan will also invest $550 billion in the United States, supporting domestic manufacturing, creating jobs, and securing long-term economic growth. For U.S. farmers and ranchers, the agreement represents a major opportunity to expand exports and strengthen trade ties with one of America's most important agricultural trade partners.
Well, continuing with some ag policy-related news, the Farm Bill plans are slipping further here into the future despite hopes of progress this month. House Republicans are already behind their goal of moving a bill out of the House Agriculture Committee by the end of September. There is, of course, a few more weeks, but it's leaving farmers waiting for clarity on programs and funding. Senate leaders are signaling that any action likely won't come until December. Senate Agriculture Chair John Boozman of Arkansas told Politico's Morning Agriculture that lawmakers can realistically expect a farm bill at the end of the year, adding it's not going to be this month. Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota says there's a reasonably good chance the legislation could pass before year's end, but confirmed there's no way it's going to happen before September 30th, citing ongoing negotiations over nominations, the National Defense Authorization Act, and government funding. Minnesota Republican Brad Frinston told Brownfield that roughly 70% of the legislation included in this year's Farm Bill was already covered in this summer's reconciliation package. Still, though, with floor time tight and key decisions pending, farmers may need to be patient before the next Farm Bill becomes law. I can only imagine, as we look at a few years ago, we were expecting it to hopefully pass, but we're still, here into 2025 and have no updated Farm Bill.
Well, as we look at continuing to discuss demand, but also supply, China, we know, still has no record of purchasing U.S. soybeans this marketing year. Meanwhile, a $500 million processing plant is going online in Mitchell, South Dakota. It opened earlier this week on Tuesday, aiming to turn more of their state's crop into oils and livestock meal. The High Plains processing plant is designed to crush about 35 million bushels of soybeans per year, creating a local market for South Dakota farmers. Tom Cresting, CEO of South Dakota Soybean Processors, said the facility will help stabilize prices and maintain demand. If it wasn't for demand sources like this facility, it'd be very, very tough out there. Noting that China had been the number one buyer of South Dakota soybeans in particular. While the plant provides a boost, farm advocates caution that a single facility can't replace the loss of a Chinese market. Governor Larry Rohde highlighted the plant's ability to process oilseeds such as sunflowers, giving farmers more flexibility as well in a shifting global market. But I know this is just one of many plants commissioned to come online in the soy processing space, Michelle.
Yeah, and as we look, U.S. farmers are missing out on billions of dollars in soybean sales to China, as we mentioned, as stalled trade talks keep exports from moving, and South American suppliers are filling that gap. Chinese buyers imported a record 12.28 million metric tons of soybeans in August, but none came from the U.S. as the ongoing trade war with D.C. disrupts supply. For October, Chinese importers have booked about 7.4 million metric tons of mainly South American soybeans, covering 95% of projected demand, with another 1 million tons planned for November. By this time last year, as we look back, Chinese buyers had booked about 12 to 13 million tons of U.S. soybeans for the September to November period, highlighting the significant drop in American exports. In 2024, the U.S. supplied roughly 20% of China's soybeans, down from 41% in 2016. Despite U.S. soybeans, though, being 80 to 90 cents a bushel cheaper than Brazilian beans, China's 23% tariff on American shipments adds about $2 per bushel, making South American soybeans more competitive. Traders say the tariffs continue to limit U.S. access to the world's largest soybean markets. So what does that mean in the months ahead? Where will our soybeans go? We'll continue to watch this piece of news.
Well, as we step into E15 headlines, California is one step closer to allowing the sale of lower-cost E15. The state Senate voted unanimously 39-0 last week to approve Assembly Bill 30, which cleared Assembly back in June. The bill now heads to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk, whose signature would make California the last state in the nation to legalize E15. Supporters say the fuel, a blend of gasoline with 15% ethanol, could bring big savings and cleaner air. A joint study from the University of California and the U.S. Naval Academy estimates E15 could save Californian drivers $2.7 billion a year, or about $200 a household, while reducing tailpipe emissions that contribute to smog, illness, and disease. Governor Newsom has previously voiced support, calling E15 a win-win that could cut gas prices by up to 20 cents per gallon while keeping California's air cleaner.
Well, another state we're talking about today is South Dakota. They're at the center of the nation's latest bird flu outbreak. More than 134,000 turkeys at 3 commercial facilities have already been killed to contain the virus, with reports of thousands of more at risk. The only other state reporting confirmed infections in commercial flocks in the latest 30 days is North Dakota, where more than 60,000 turkeys were destroyed, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. State veterinarian Beth Thompson says the early detections are troubling. Bird flu typically spikes during the fall and spring migrations of wild birds, which can carry the virus without showing symptoms. Seeing the virus spread before migration, though, begins to raise some new concerns. The USDA also confirmed recent detections outside the Midwest, including at a live bird market in Los Angeles County, California, and in backyard flocks in New York State.
Well, Michelle, as we take a look here at some of the latest USDA's farm income forecasts, the USDA is predicting farm income will climb in 2025, as we shared on last year's podcast. But analysts warn the numbers don't tell the whole story, which I think we talked about as well. Net farm income is expected to rise 41% this year to nearly $180 billion. Much of that increase, though, comes from government payments, which are expected to total more than $40 billion, about 3 times higher than last year. I think I read an increase of about $30.5 billion in total. AFBF economist Bert Nelson says the report shows 2 very different farm economies, crops and livestock. Crop receipts are projected to fall to their lowest level since 2007, while livestock receipts are forecast to jump 11%, driven by largely higher cattle and egg prices. That would push animal and animal product sales to a record $300 billion. Nelson also says that rising farm debt is another red flag. Sector debt is expected to reach nearly $592 billion in 2025, up almost 20%. Since the Fed began raising interest rates back in 2022. The cost to service debt is also growing, with interest rate forecasts to climb another $1.6 billion this year. And as we know, the farm economy is in a very fragile financial situation right now. And he says that there's more to be done and to take a deeper look at that USDA report.
Well, as we look at some research, a new Purdue University survey shows nearly half of Midwestern farmers expect their operations to grow in the next 5 years. The study, conducted in February of this year with 400 producers, also found 40% expect to stay the same size and about 10% expect to downsize. Growth was most likely among farmers with stronger finances, younger operators, new family members joining the business, and a willingness to take on more risk. Ag economist Michael Langmeyer says low profit margins are forcing some farmers to scale back investments. He notes that those in stronger financial positions are more likely to expand and told Brownfield, if you're optimistic about the future, you're probably in a better financial position, he said. He also points to generational differences. Younger producers, he says, are more likely to adopt new practices with higher long returns like cover crops, while conservation practices can sometimes cost more in the short run. Langmeyer says they tend to pay off when adopted over several years.
Well, Michelle, for our final headline this week, watching what is happening in Midwestern states themselves in ag. One state is proposing government fees climbing nearly 1,700%. Wisconsin livestock markets, dealers, and truckers could see steep fee hikes under a new rule change proposed by state agriculture regulators. Some fees would climb by nearly 1,700%, and some lawmakers say the legislature can't block the plan because of a recent Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling. The Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection says fees haven't gone up since 2009 and can no longer cover costs of the program. The agency projects a $1.1 million shortfall by 2027 when the new fees would take effect, and officials also cite reduced federal funding as a reason for the change. Farm groups worry that the proposal could drive business across state lines in neighboring states. Livestock market licenses cost between $50 and $300, and under this plan, Wisconsin's license fee would jump to more than $7,400, a sharp contrast that critics say would make the state an outlier. The proposed changes were released earlier this month, and public hearings are starting to begin this week.
Well, this week's interview is one of the many conversations Tanner Winterhof brought back from the Farm Progress Show. Of course, he's at Husker Harvest Days in Nebraska this week, and so we're always grateful for the many conversations he brings for here on the podcast. This week in the podcast, he sat down with BASF's Bryan and Scott Bay to talk everything from seed to fungicides and herbicides. Let's jump into that conversation right now.
All right, out here at Farm Progress Day 2 of 2025. Excited to catch up with an old friend. I get to make a new one. Excited to join in the conversation today. Two of the folks from BASF. We have Scott and Bryan here. Welcome to Day 2.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Beautiful day out.
So we'll start with you, Bryan. Why don't you remind our listeners what your role is, and then Scott will let you introduce yourself after that.
Okay? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good to be back with you again after last year. My name is Bryan Perry. I head up our U.S. seeds and traits business at BASF. So for us, primarily cotton, canola, and soybeans would be my main focus crops.
That's good. Scott?
Yeah, and good morning. Great to be here. And that my role, Scott Kay, I'm Vice President of our U.S. business, and that entails sales, marketing, technical services, and business operations.
That's great. And we were reflecting before we turned the mics on that there's a lot has changed since our conversation last year and where we're sitting at this year. And one of those is no secret to any producer, and margins feel tight. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think they're right. I think it started last year. Certainly I think with that in mind, we probably think of two different things. One, do farmers continue to look for new solutions to problems that they have? And then I think the liquidity topic is real. And at BASF, we chose to invest in a big way with 0% financing across our portfolio.
0%.
0%.
That is a big way to show farmers that you're on their side. That certainly is something that's going to be extremely important come this time of year. But it's neat to see that BASF is continuing to push forward, making sure that even though times are tight, we don't fall back on technology. We're going to push technology forward. So excited to hear about that.
Yeah, I think, going back to the realities, both Scott and I grew up on family farms. We're both still involved in our family farms, so definitely can appreciate the challenges that producers are facing when you just pencil things out. I mean, it's tougher with commodity prices as is. However, as Scott mentioned, you think about resources like financing, but it's also about bushels. And if I look at BASF, one of the things that I really enjoy the most about BASF is the commitment to innovation and R&D. So we still continue to put 11 cents of every dollar a grower spends on a BASF seed treatment, or crop protection solution back into R&D. So you need to keep pushing for the bushels. We're not slowing down on our commitment to innovation, even though, the market's a little tougher, and we think that there's a balance, right? There's a balance of the financing, making sure our products are priced to value appropriately, but also bringing new stuff out that keeps bringing the yield level up, and that's how they pay the bills ultimately, right?
That's right. I'm so glad that you have a way to identify how much of that goes into research and development. 11 cents out of every dollar. That's a big investment.
Yeah, and it's something that we've been steadfast in for quite some time. In fact, actually, for a long time, you would have heard us say 10 cents on every dollar, and actually we've been increasing a bit, and that kind of connects to us being in seed now, along with what we've been doing with crop protection innovation.
But I think, with that investment, I think we try and stay grounded at the farm level. And so hopefully a lot of the folks who watch this show will participated in our real results yield challenge. And so there we decided to say, hey, we've got this new technology. Our market research would say maybe only about 40% of farmers plan to use a fungicide in their row crops, corn and soybeans. And so we decided to set out a challenge, and with really good results, where we just wanted them to try either against untreated or treated if they wanted to compare. But we had 1,800 growers.
Wow.
Do a field level, side-by-side yield challenge. And some 300 of our retailers were supporting that effort as well. And so we're really excited about the challenge and starting to see some of the results come in. We're anxious to see those.
Yeah, no kidding. That definitely, when you said you're going to take that research to the farm level, what better way to grab data than to have your customers give that data to you?
And the nice thing is, a majority of those customers who tried it are really using it. They didn't use it the prior year. And so what better way to see if you want to invest for 2026 than to have it right there on your farm?
Absolutely. You also were saying, the proof of that investment is in your plots here too, on your demonstration, to be able to see some of the new technology that you're pushing forward in the soybean world. Tell us a little bit about what you're excited there for growers.
Yeah, you go to the plots like Scott was saying, and there's, multiple levels. There's on farm, which farmers like to see it in their field and their conditions. There's the research. There's plots that we have here at Farm Progress. So people want to come by the BASF booth. They can see the latest and greatest Zetavo genetics. We're focused on bringing high yielding genetics that provide differentiation to help growers with the pests in their field. The other thing is forward-looking as well. So one of the things on the horizon is a new game-changing trait by the name of Nemasphere. That's a trait that BASF has developed to control soybean cyst nematode, which is the #1 yield-robbing pest in soybeans. And that's currently targeted to be launched in the 2028 season. So that may seem like a long ways away, but if you think about it, growers will be making decisions on that seed in the fall of 27. And here we are, approaching, or in the fall almost of, 25. So that's just 2 years away. So a lot of work to get that out on farms. And I think, Scott, you actually just saw some of it in one of our trials.
Yeah, if seeing's believing, I think for sure we saw it yesterday, and it shows up differently. Soybean growers out there, they're going to nod their head saying, yeah, that's pretty obvious. But when you see the same variety across the field, and where we're controlling the SCN, the rows are closed. Then it was very obvious where we weren't closed rows, that was where the SCN was really taking a hold.
Yep.
And I think we were speculating that could be 10, 20, 25 bushels at least. Now, of course, we'll harvest it and see, but
right.
We were in the farmer's field, so we're getting the farmer. He's telling us what he sees too, and so we didn't have to believe it for our own eyes. They're letting us know that this is a technology that they really want and need right now.
I had the pleasure earlier this year talking to a researcher around SCN and the multi-pronged approach that it's going to take to battle SCN going forward. And it's nice to know that BASF is adding another tool to the toolbox for growers to be able to work against that.
Well, 100%. I think what's also neat about it is this will be the first ever genetically modified trait or biotech trait. There's native traits in the market, although you see resistance continuing to grow, much like with weeds. And that's where, going back to BASF, that commitment to innovation, we want to help farmers do the biggest job on earth. We believe that it is the biggest job as we feed, fuel, and clothe the world. And so when you think about the whole acre, farmers think about seed treatment, crop protection. So you hear us talking about innovations like Nemasphere, like Liberty Ultra, like Zidua Plus, like Revitech. So we kind of can keep going down the list and thinking about, okay, farmers wake up and think about, how do I grow better corn and soybeans? And we want to be a part of that solution.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said all those names. I got those names on my list, but when you started off with Zotavo, I don't even think I still said that right.
That's okay. We like to pronounce X's as Z's. So just, Zotavo, Xemium, I could go down the list.
Oh, that's great. What else are you excited to be sharing with growers that visit you here out at Farm Progress Show?
I think the innovation message is really what we're after, because in times like this, people, maybe they pull back.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that on their evaluation list of what should I do different based on what I did in 25, I think to maintain your agility in terms of your flexibility on farm. And we have a new product launch this year, Certain herbicide. So it's pre-post flexibility in corn that gives farmers residual, I think allows them that flexibility. So season's running early, they can go pre. Season's running a little bit later and their planting timing, they can go early post. And so those are the kind of decisions we want to help farmers, give them that extra agility.
Yeah, I appreciate you using that terminology. I think that's going to be important for growers no matter where they're at, no matter what market environment they're in, to be able to make a decision on the fly or based upon the way the environment's reacting, and really put that towards the bottom line of the grower. Well, if our listeners that didn't get to attend Farm Progress Show want to learn more information, how best do they find stuff online?
Well, there's a couple ways we'd like to recommend for people to learn more. You mentioned online. You can go to the BASF website and do a little research there. My personal favorite is to go see their local ag retailer. We work strongly through our retail partners to help bring the best information, the proof locally. And then the last part is where you have a relationship with your local BASF representative. Ag is still a people business, and we've got a lot of great folks that are willing to help answer their questions.
And I would just add one more, revexfields.com. I think farmers need to check it out. They can see real results in their own backyard.
I appreciate you adding that to it. Gentlemen, I also appreciate you making this one of the first stops of your day. Thank you for joining the Ag News Daily team, and hopefully it's another good day for you.
Yep, same to you. Thanks for the opportunity to start our day off here.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Tanner, for bringing that back to us on the podcast. And this week's fertilizer update, sent as a media update from Josh Linville of StoneX. The biggest global story remains India's urea purchase tender, shocking the market with 5.6 million tons offered, the biggest ever, but it's only expected to buy 2 million, leaving another tender likely soon, he says. Chinese exports are ramping up with 4.25 million tons expected this year, adding pressure on prices. In North America, fall ammonia demand looks strong, with NH3 still the cheapest nitrogen option ahead of the big 2026 corn acres. High prices continue as Chinese exports lag far behind normal levels. India is still buying at more than $800 CFR, while U.S. production sits near record lows. Without demand destruction, supply issues could build. Stable for now, but demand could swing. Farmers may cut back if phosphate stays expensive or shift more towards potash this fall, something we'll continue to look at as fertilizer prices, especially this fall. Delaney, what's happening with markets this week?
Well, definitely. We're seeing a lot of focus on the WASDE this week, which I'll get to here in just a moment. But I also wanted to just share a couple quick updates here on soybean export sales and also soybean drought. 22% of the U.S. soybean crop growing areas are experiencing some level of drought, according to this week's U.S. Drought Monitor. That's up 6% week on week. And that marks a 19% jump from the 3% that we saw at the start of August. So certainly as we think about that final growing stretch here for soybeans and pod filling, this could highlight a pretty major shift that we might see here in yield numbers. Corn and soybean ratings, of course, falling as well, and some lackluster export sales this week are all weighing on the markets. Of course, we also have the USDA's WASDE report releasing later today, where USDA is expected to cut soybean yield estimates. And a reduction isn't necessarily assured, but it is assumed by traders since, again, August weather has not been favorable. So as we think about where the USDA report could land us for today, the national average soybean yield, 53.2, down from 53.6 for the previous month. That's where folks are expecting to see the yields come in. And as far as the corn balance sheet, probably not going to see major changes to that yield or acreage number today, but who knows? And then lastly here, thing I'll mention that markets are paying attention to, may not have factored in yet, but rumors are starting up about some fresh negotiations with China. So that's what I've got for the markets this week, Michelle.
And it's definitely turning into fall harvest. I'm a Packers fan, so Packers won last night. College football. There's a lot going on this fall.
There certainly is. And stay tuned with Ag News Daily as you're getting into the combine this fall. We'll keep you up to date on all the things ag, weather, trade, and more. You can follow along with us on social media at Ag News Daily. But what do you say for today, Michelle? We let the people go.
Let's let them go.